Today I'm looking at this Epiphone Riviera, based on the original model from the 60s. So unlike the majority of modern Epiphones, this is not a Gibson clone. So who will this appeal to? Well, maybe you. A lot of younger players have only ever known Epiphone as Gibson's budget import line. But the Epiphone name goes back 150 years. And in the 1920s and 30s, Epiphone instruments were some of the finest in the world. Now, sadly, after the death of Epi himself, the company began to fall on hard times. In 1953, they moved from Manhattan to Pennsylvania, and a lot of the skilled employees refused to move with the company. In the meantime, their main rival, Gibson, wanted Epiphone's renowned upright basses. And to get those, Gibson ended up buying the entire company. Well, this worked out well for Gibson because their dealers were guaranteed exclusive rights to sell Gibson in their specific area. So the classic Kalamazoo-built Epiphones were produced not as a budget brand, but as an alternative brand, allowing another dealer in the same area to sell a line of Gibson products without violating the dealer agreement. Now, Epiphone was not seen as inferior in any way in those days. I was around back then, and I can tell you a lot of great players chose the Epiphone models, including blues greats like Otis Rush and John Lee Hooker. The recent Epiphone company has, from time to time, released some of the historic models from the glory years. Now, in the past, many of those carried the name and some of the cosmetics without really being particularly accurate. I owned an 80s Japanese-built Riviera, and other than the headstock and the inlays, it really was just a rebranded 335. But in the last decade, we've been treated to reissues that have been reasonably accurate. I mean, given the constraints of their offshore production and the pricing goals. Now, these have included the reintroduction of some of the classic solid bodies, the Coronet, the Wilshire, and of course the Crestwood Custom I reviewed last year. And when they introduced a new, fairly original spec Riviera last year, well, I knew I had to check one out. All historic Rivieras had the mini humbuckers, and it's great to see those in place. And what says vintage Epiphone more than the Frequensator tailpiece? This came from the original New York guitars long before Gibson purchased the company. Now, in theory, this gives you less tension on the treble strings and more on the bass strings. You know, in practice, I can't say I really notice much difference, but hey, it looks cool nonetheless. This sparkling burgundy is not a finish I've ever seen on a vintage model. They were all either sunburst or cherry as far as I know. And I kind of wonder why Epiphone didn't just stick to that. Maybe they needed a solid finish to use when the underlying maple wasn't so attractive. These are, after all, built to a price. Still, this finish looks nice regardless. Now, at this price, we can't expect painstaking vintage accuracy, but overall, I think Epiphone's done a nice job building a Riviera that's well put together and with the features that make it uniquely Epiphone. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you again very soon.